All right, so moving on to number three, we have on Apple Music's official list, we have a album that now has a studio named after it, and rightfully so. That is Abbey Road by the Beatles. The illustrious Beatles, one of the greatest groups of all time. Many people say like they kind of started classic rock, like almost every classic rock group that's come out of them has cited them as some kind of influence. I know here in Charlotte, Tosco's music party literally hosts a tribute to the Beatles every single year at a theater where he invites people to come out and cover different Beatles songs. And John Tosco he's a really cool guy, a good friend of mine, and he's always like, "Will, you got to come out." And I'm like, "John, I don't know any Beatles. I can't sing the Beatles." And I don't even know how to like play it on saxophone because like I'm like I just
Mhm.
don't know the Beatles. That's not what I was raised on. Um, Usually he's like, just come anyway and
Just
play
come anyway.
something.
Yeah.
Just play something. And I was like, okay. So eventually I have to make it out there. But Abbey Road, I feel like it kind of belongs in this spot because of what it did for rock and classic rock. Again, this is more impact rather than like how I feel about it. Because again, it's not the kind of music that I like came up with. Um,
Mhm.
so how do you feel? Have you heard this album before? Or like, how do you feel about this album in its spot and what it's done for music in general?
Uh, I got feelings about the Beatles that get me crucified on this podcast. Um, I don't really care for them. I've never really liked the Beatles. I've never really gotten it. And,
Oh,
maybe
really?
it's just a
Okay.
generational thing. I've always been more of a Zombies guy. They were another like British rock group around the same time that had very similar sound and like I don't know, Paul McCartney's a good bassist. That's about all I got for the Beatles. So like I understand how from other people of how influential Abbey Road is. To me, when I listen to it, my brain just kind of glazes over.
It
I
just kind of
really,
like fog, yeah.
yeah, I really honestly I just don't care about the Beatles at one bit. I think what always surprises me is how brief their run was of making music. It was like the span of like early 60s to late 60s, and that was it.
Really?
And then they broke up. They released so many albums in that time. Like it's very impressive what they did and the impact they have. And so a pick like this, I get it from like the impact end because people don't shut up about Abbey Road by the Beatles
Or people don't shut up about the Beatles in general.
in general. So I'm kind of with you on this one. Well, I have to just take people's word at it
Yeah.
that this is their best and the most influential. I will
Oh
say,
yeah, they had it from there because they formed in 1960 and Let It Be came out in 1970 and Abbey Road came out in 1961, but that's like 10 albums in 10 years.
yeah, yeah, they released a bunch of stuff.
Wow.
And then isn't it like, okay, so maybe they made it into the 70s, but was it like 71 that they broke up or something?
Let It Be came out in 1970 and then that was their last album. I'm like, "Oh wow. I can divide. That's like an album every year."
Yeah,
Like for real.
until 1970. Yep. Yeah, so they didn't last very long, like only 10 years, one decade.
Yeah. It came out a month after the group's public breakup, their last album, Let It Be. So, I mean, all I can really say about them, there's this movie called Yesterday. It's actually really good. Um, where like the everyone in the world forgets the Beatles and their music, and this guy, struggling singer-songwriter, is the only one who remembers it. But, like he just
Hmm.
wakes up and it's like randomly, and he's the only one that remembers it. And so he kind of just ends up becoming famous because he starts like performing all these Beatles songs, and everybody's like, "That's the greatest song I've ever heard." And I'm like, "Is it?
Is it though?
Is it?" But I mean, he ends up becoming famous. There's a really good scene where he has like a song right off with Ed Sheeran, and he like plays this song at the end, He plays this song, and Ed Sheeran's like about to cry, and he's like, "That's literally the best thing I've." He's like, "You win, man. I bow out of this," and I'm like, I don't, I don't. Again, I don't
I don't
personally
know.
know, and I don't really get it, but I did love the way that they ended it because they didn't make him like wake up from a dream. He just kind
Hmm.
of kept playing, and eventually these two random people found him, and they were like, "You're playing Beatles songs." And it
Hmm.
kind of was like, oh my God, everything's gonna blow up. They're gonna expose him for playing music that's not really his.
Hmm.
Um, and they were both like, thank you. And he was like, you guys aren't gonna like expose me or like, and they were like,
Uh-huh.
well, we can't sing or play guitar. And they're like, we feel like the world is better for having the Beatles music in it. So I'm just glad that you can do it and that you remember them and brought this music to everybody. And I was like, what a great message. Like, I don't know.
Very, yeah.
I guess the best thing, I guess we can, it's really
So,
sad if like
so
the
on
best
our
thing,
list, number three is the movie
yes.
Yesterday.
I'm like, I mean, I'm trying to talk about the Beatles, and I guess it's not a good sign that like a movie from 2019 is the only way I can reference them. But again, that's why I think the album, I could still say it belongs here because like, especially off of that movie, especially the impact that they had. Obviously, they meant a lot to a lot of people.
Hmm.
One of the few that's not in that group. However, I do think it's fitting. And I think I probably would have been not upset, but I'm glad that the album that's number two is ahead of this one. Like, I don't mind this album being ahead of Prince and Stevie Wonder. I don't think you can put this album ahead of what's at number two. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my piece on that.
Okay.
Um, but now we get to
So
talk about number three.
what is your number three, Will?
You want to hear mine first?
Yes.
I think you already know what it's going to be because you already know my top three albums. And while we're talking about amazing music that came out in 2016, I have to say Chance the Rapper's Coloring Book is number three for me. And I'm honestly super disappointed that it didn't make it onto this list. And if I had to like, again, for the most part, I kind of agree with the top 10 and where they are. Back to Black and Blonde, I probably would remove because I don't think those are top 10. Still
Hmm.
still on the list, I would just kind of like bump them down. And I would probably move up Kind of Blue. And if I didn't move up a Marvin Gaye album into the top 10, I'd be putting Coloring Book at number 10.
Mm.
And that might probably be a hot take because I also noticed this list has a lot of hip hop on it, a lot of rock, and a lot of hip hop. And like,
Good.
that's a good thing.
That's a
But
good
like,
thing.
it doesn't really represent a whole lot of jazz. It doesn't represent a
No.
whole lot of country, either. Um, and so like some people notice that like the list appears to be like if you're asking popular musicians, you're probably going to end up getting a lot of rap, I mean, a lot of hip hop and a lot of rock because that's like a lot of the popular musicians have been influenced by those genres. Um, but the reason why I still think Coloring Book should be here is because Coloring Book is a mixtape.
Mhm.
Like it's a mixtape. It's Chance's third mixtape. And first of all, the themes on it are incredible. Um, every artist that he brings on to feature is absolutely amazing. And I think the production style and the music style of the album, he really brings out the best in every artist. Like I was telling you, I didn't know Justin Bieber could sing like that until I heard um Juke Jam. I
Mhm.
didn't know he could sing like that. It was incredible. And to me, like that's the best I've ever heard him.
Mhm.
Jay Electronica, to me, on how great, my opinion, best guest rap verse of all time. And I
So
think that's the
good.
best verse on the entire album. I
Mhm.
absolutely love it. And I think to make an album this iconic, and the main reason why is because, again, like I said, I really like the story around We Got It From Here. Thank you for your service. Because
Mhm.
while they didn't know, like, obviously they didn't know Fife Dog was going to die while they made this album, and it felt like a beautiful send off. And to me, that's what makes it better. Like,
Mhm.
I think it would still be in my top 10 if Fife Dog hadn't died, but the story surrounding the album is partly what lifts it up to this level. And to me, the story surrounding Coloring Book is even more impactful, especially when you look at the industry, like music industry impactful, because on Ultralight Beam, which is a single that came out in 2015 before,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe it was 2015, yeah, where Chance the Rapper featured on Kanye West song
From the Life of Pablo.
from the Life of Pablo, yeah. Um, Chance the Rapper literally said, I'm gonna release an album, it's gonna be free, and I'm still gonna win a Grammy for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like on Ultralight Beam, he says, let's make it so he's like, I hear you gotta sell it to snatch the Grammy. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
let's make it so free
Free in the bar so hard.
that there ain't one gosh darn part you can't tweet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he's literally like prophesying, right?
Yeah.
And then Coloring Book comes out, and there was a huge argument for it because people were like, this needs to be on there for best rap album. Like literally telling the Grammys, you have to do this. Okay. We are not gonna repeat Good Kid Mad City from 2012.
Right.
And the heist from 2012. And they were like, well, it's a mixtape. Like Grammys are albums. But because it was released on streaming, Chance still made money from it. It was still technically sold because it generated a revenue. So they were able to put it on there, and it won the Grammy. And it's like a mixtape has never won a Grammy before. And like it's partly due to the rise of streaming, but to me, to have an artist sit there and be like, I'm gonna make an album that's so good and so free that everybody will be able to hear it because I want this message to get to everybody and anybody. And because it's free, anybody can get it. And I'm also still gonna win a Grammy for it, even though that's never been done. Predict it and then have it happen, and not only have it happen, but actually deserve it. To me, that's a huge impact in the music industry. And I think that at least deserves to be on the list and deserves to be in the top 10 because of it. Maybe at
Yeah.
number 10, but that's my whole
But
reasoning behind it.
for you, definitely number 3. I
Mhm.
think it's funny too, because you mentioned like he kind of prophesied it on The Life of Pablo. Coloring Book was up against The Life of Pablo for
Mhm.
the best rap album. I looked it up real quick just to see the competition. And like there's some like DJ Khaled was up there. Like
Yeah,
no way
okay.
he's ever gonna.
No.
But like for like a popular take, like Drake's Views, he was in
Mhm.
competition with. And then of course The Life of Pablo itself, which was a really good uh uh Kanye West album.
Yeah, and I
So,
mean, like I said, the competition wasn't exactly fierce in 2016.
but
But
still the fact that he did it with it being a mixtape,
yeah,
which
and
I go ahead.
and the thing is, he didn't know the competition was going to be fierce when he predicted it.
Right.
Like to me, that's the part that sets it. Like even if it just did that and he didn't say like that's what he wanted, maybe it. But to say that, not know what the competition is, and be like, no, I'm going to make it free and I'm going to win a Grammy from it. To me,
Right.
is just incredible. And I think every feature on here, and like it's really sad because at this point we talked about it before. Coloring Book outstreamed Views by Drake. And
Yeah.
like Chance was kind of on the verge of competing with Drake. Like we could have been looking at a Drake can't Chance the Rapper feud because he was really on his way. Each mixtape has slowly gotten him more and more acclaim until he was here competing with Views by Drake, and he outstreamed him. He also outstreamed Lemonade, but Lemonade was only on Tidal. But anyway, so
Right.
he's outstreaming Drake right now. And then his debut album, though, The Big Day, was such a flop that he ended up where he is right now. And, obviously still a fantastic artist, still famous, but, we're not talking about him as one of the top artists in the game. Like,
Right.
you look at his listener count and he's like in the 10 million. And I'm like, that's crazy for having released an album like Coloring Book that got billions of streams. And he probably was one of the top artists in the world back when it came out
Right
in
when that came
2016.
out. Mhm.
Um, and it's amazing that like I feel like with the last day, he just got with the big day, he just got buried after that.
Yeah.
But this is another album I feel like is perfect. No skips, not a single skip. The only song I used to skip was Smoke Break and All Night. And even after a while, both of
Oh,
those
really?
like because all night, like until I listened to it like at a dance party, then I was like, oh, okay. And then I started dancing to it, and now I like it a lot more.
Yeah.
Um, and I used to skip Smoke Break because like, Future's part was like okay. Um, but I really like Chance's part on it. And I feel
Mhm.
like it represents so many different assets of hip hop, from neo soul to trap to kind of like a um almost like a sing-songy trap feel. There's even like a
Mhm.
reggae feel almost on Angels
And
with
then
Saba. It's
some strong gospel influence through the lyrics and
strong gospel, yeah. Spoken word going on there as well. Um, it's just an incredible album to me. I think it deserves more love. And I think partially why it's kind of not on the top 100 is because the big day was so bad and he lost. I don't think he lost so many fans, but it just completely halted any trajectory and like sent him in the opposite direction.
yeah,
Which,
he couldn't keep it up with like influence. Like he's not really much in the conversation anymore since Coloring Book.
yeah. And it's sad because I think he deserved to be with how great this album is, but it is what it is. That's what happens. But that doesn't
It's
take
a
away.
it is a special album. I
Mhm,
remember when it came out, I got Apple Music just to listen to this album.
mhm,
Because I remember you were loving it so much. And so I was like, okay, all right, I guess I'll check it out. And it was
mhm.
the first thing I ever listened to with music streaming, and it's something special. It's not to this day, it's not my favorite of Chance the Rappers, but I think I get why it's here. It's definitely I think it's his best like produced.
Mhm.
I think it has his best features. And it's just like I don't know. I look at the album cover and I think it's something special. I'm ready to experience this really special album.
Is Acid Rap your favorite by Chance the Rapper?
Yes, I'm more privy to acid rap. I love
Yeah.
acid rap so much. But I think you make a really great point too with, there's no mixtapes on the top 100 albums. And I get that it's 100 albums, but I think, it loses this accessibility to certain parts of music.
Hmm.
Where like a lot of people, a lot of rappers especially start with mixtapes. A lot of rockers start with demo tapes, and
Yeah.
to have one of those be the thing that grants you critical acclaim is I think it's a beacon to like anyone else who's making music of like, hey, look, you don't need to be all that. You can just make this in your garage and you if it's if you pour your heart and soul to it and like you get a little lucky and people like catch on to it, like that's all you need.
And I think it means a lot more to me too, because, I was that, like we discussed, like my parents were keeping me away from rap music. Like I was
Mhm.
not, gangster rap was not played in my house, right? Like for me to
Mhm.
discover rap, I had to, if like I didn't have any money as a kid, so I couldn't just go out and buy a rap album that I wanted. I was either having to like illegally download the songs, or I'd be listening to a lot to mixtapes. And I was heavy into the mixtape game. Logic's mixtape, Lupe Fiasco's mixtapes. So I think for this mixtape to be so good, I think it just means a lot for me because that's really the hip hop culture and world I was in. Mixtapes are a huge part of how a lot of rappers get started. And I think this one was fantastic. And I think it really deserves my love. And like, it's really funny because like, I'm one of the weird people that didn't really like acid rap that much. I think just like the first couple of songs that I heard, like I didn't really like the one with Smoke Again with Absol. And I just remember
Mhm.
like Chance the Rapper, like, who is this guy? I didn't really like him at all. And I was like, I thought he was. I didn't like him. I didn't vibe with him at all. And then this album came out, and it completely like I didn't want to like it because I didn't like Chance the Rapper, and
Mm.
it forced me to like sit down, listen to it, and love it. And it is number three. All right. So what do you have for your number three?
Number three, I mix it up to Pimp a Butterfly by
Okay.
Mm.
Kendrick Lamar. Which, like I said, my picks are all over the place. But for number three, I have To Pimp a Butterfly. I feel like this sounds backwards, but that was kind of more of my intro to Kendrick Lamar. I
Yeah, that
didn't
makes
really
Okay.
sense.
pay.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, I didn't really pay like I feel like he had plenty of other, songs and hits up to that point, but I never really paid them any mind. But I just remember at one point I saw To Pimp a Butterfly and I listened to it and that song is just the depth behind it really touched me.
Hmm.
I find it thought provoking. It's like you said earlier, it's not something that's really kind of newcomer friendly, but when you get into it, I feel like you can tell he put a lot of love and care into it.
What
Mhm.
makes you put this album over Good Kid, Mad City? Because for Apple
Yeah.
Music, not only did they put Good Kid, Mad City over To Pimp a Butterfly, To Pimp a Butterfly didn't make it on the list
I disagree. Um,
with
I
Apple
disagree.
Music. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, Apple Music is wrong. Um, Mad City, they're wrong. I mean, here's the thing. If they were right, we wouldn't be going through our top tens. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
personally, I mean, that album was really good. But like I said, one partially more sentimental reasons for To Pimp a Butterfly, but also, let me see. I'm gonna pull up its track list right here so I can look at it. But I just,
I know, like, I love this album especially because it introduced me to Rhapsody. And my favorite
mm,
verse on the whole album is her verse on Complexion of Zulu Love. And I think
mm,
she absolutely bodies that verse. I think she absolutely encompasses the feeling of the entire album. And that's not something that's easy to do. Like she
mm.
to me, I think she captured the essence of it in just one verse. And I mean, it's hard to like pick out like that was like the best verse on the whole album because Kendrick throughout the song he goes between singing and rapping. Like he doesn't have as much defined verse structure as he does on Good Kid, Mad City. But I just know that's the one that stands out to me. That's the one that left me with the impact when I stepped away and turned off the album.
So let me think. Did Good Kid, Mad City come first?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, see that one came first. I feel like Good Kid, Mad City's up there because once again, since it's Kendrick Lamar, it's very good. It's a very thought-provoking album, but I feel like To Pimp a Butterfly is a little more like it's not for everybody. Which, I mean, not like Kendrick's music in general is for everybody, but with Good Kid, Mad City, I feel like there was plenty of more songs that I feel like resonated with a wider audience. And so I feel like that's definitely why it's on that list, because I feel like he does deserve to be on that top 10 list. But I feel like it makes sense that Good Kid, Mad City is what put him on the list for Apple.
And I think partially why Good Kid, Mad City is more accessible, as they called it. I think that's part one. And I think To
Hmm.
Bump a Butterfly is related to Good Kid, Mad City. And I think it continues the story in a different way. It's
Hmm.
deeper. It's kind of like again, if you had the sequel to a movie and the movie was like, because it's the sequel, you would feel like you could get a little more in depth. Like Section
Mhm.
80 doesn't feel related to Good Kid, Mad City or To Pimp a Butterfly. To Pimp a
Yeah.
Butterfly really, even though it's not, it feels like it's the sequel to Good Kid, Mad City. And oftentimes sequels will delve more. They do more. They can get deeper. Like compared to like Good Kid, Mad City is Batman Begins, and To Pimp a Butterfly is The Dark Knight. Like
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about right here. And so I think, yeah, I see your viewpoint, and I agree. I think that's a good spot for it. I don't know if I'd have both of them in the top 10 for Apple Music's lists, And I almost can't really decide which one I'd like more. I'd have to do my own top 100 and just see where they stack up somewhere on the list.
My number three, again, this is an album I consider to be perfect. It is my favorite jazz album of all time.
Oh, okay. Oh,
It is Herbie Hancock's Headhunters.
what? That's crazy.
Ever since,
Oh,
like, I mentioned the whole thing about like how they said there was a before Blonde and after Blonde. For
uh-huh.
myself personally, there has been a great divide of before listening to Herbie Hancock and after listening to Herbie Hancock.
That's crazy.
I think it's ridiculous this album did not make the top 100 on
Agreed.
Apple's, like, for what this does for funky jazz. It's stupid. It needs to be.
Stupid.
It belongs. If anything, I think from my list that I have up here that's not on the list, I think this is the thing most deserving to be on the list, and it's criminal that it's underrepresented. Um, it's 4 tracks. That's all it is. But when the bass line comes on of Chameleon, I just start like I just start vibrating, man. It is a groove. And it's I think for me, when I was younger, jazz felt like when I was a kid, jazz felt inaccessible. It felt like kind of just chaos and noise because I was a kid and I didn't understand what was going on. To me, it was just loud at times, or it was really boring and sleepy if it was just like smooth jazz.
Mhm.
And so it never excited me. When I first listened to this album in my 20s, just from trying to go back and rectify like this musical void, like of my backlog of listening to jazz. I saw that this was one of like the jazz albums to like check out. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, I will listen to it. And ever since I was grooving, I was dancing. It shook me. It shook like my perception of what jazz could be when I listened to this album. Um, I'm not sure. I'm not as well versed into jazz as a genre to know how influential this is compared to something, say, Bitches Brew, for like an experimental jazz album. But for me, this is the thing that made, like, I listened to it and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we can just have fun here. Like this can be exciting, it can be funky, it can be something you dance to. Like Watermelon Man has the flutes at the beginning. I'd never heard of flutes in jazz before. Like, just from my exposure, I'd never listened to it before. The second I did, I was like, I want more flutes and jazz. Like, I love me some
Mhm.
some brass instruments, but I would love to hear some more flutes.
Joey would be Joey is another one of our best friends from growing up, and he would be so proud right now.
Does he love Herbie Hancock?
This is one of his favorite albums. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
Headhunters, if you talk to anyone who plays jazz and you mention Headhunters by Herbie Hancock and they look at you like, "What?" They're not really a jazz musician. Like, I hate to make that, but like every
Okay.
single jazz musician has heard Headhunters by Herbie Hancock.
Okay.
Alex, I could call him up right now and say, "Alex, can you play Chameleon for me?" And he'd be playing it on the piano.
Boom, boom,
Like,
boom, boom, boom,
mm,
boom,
mm,
boom, boom, boom,
mm,
boom,
mm,
boom,
mm,
boom,
mm. I
boom,
can't tell
boom,
you
boom,
how many
boom,
times
boom,
I've soloed over that song,
boom,
played over that song. Alex and I used to go to the farmers market in the morning, right off of Gemini Springs, where we grew up, at 6
Mhm.
a.m. And he used to play Baseline Chameleon Man, and now would just play saxophone over it. And we do the
Yeah.
same thing with Watermelon Man. And we actually got a few tips. It was all right.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Let's go.
but yeah, I mean, this is one of the most influential albums for funk, for jazz. Like I would say that like Kind of Blue did more for jazz, especially because it came out more before then. But this
Mhm.
was kind of helping jazz fusion. This album really helped jazz cross over. And it really helped because again, as jazz was starting to not like die, it was kind of there was more genres coming up. Like jazz dominated popularity from like the 30s up until like the 50s, kind of when like Elvis, in the 60s when Elvis started to take over with like blues and rock and roll. And like,
Mhm.
but all that blues came from jazz. So it was kind of like you could see how stuff was like veering off from jazz.
Mhm.
And like this album was a way to kind of fuse what was happening back with jazz and bring like it kind of brought jazz back into the conversation because it kind of started to feel like, hey, we're just gonna take your jazz and just like strip out all the complicated stuff, and then that'll become a lot more popular. And that's how all these musical genres started to form. And it's like Herbie Hancock is like, oh, instead of like staying in our own corner or being like, we can't mess with that. He's like, let's blend it. Let's bring some stuff
Let's
together.
embrace it.
Exactly. And I think this album was it's incredible. Um I love that it's number 3 for you. Like that's insane. Like I would have been blown away if it was on your list. But for it to be number 3,
And it's
like
and this is why this is like a best of, because of course like Stadium Arcadium is my favorite album, but and like at the beginning stages of this list I had that as my number 3, and Headhunters was actually number, everything was down one, so this was number 4, and I kept thinking in my head, and I'm like, I don't feel that in good conscience I could put the Red Hot Chili Peppers above this album, because I listened to it and it's like I get it. Like I do not have a background of like music theory. I don't have the background of jazz. And when I listen to this album, it's like it clicks. I don't need any words. It just, I hear it and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the
yes.
stuff. Inject
Yeah.
it straight into my veins. I want to listen to more of it.
I mean,
It
yeah.
inspired, it led me to what has become probably one of my like favorite jazz fusion groups, Cassiopeia. If you've ever
Okay.
listened to them, Will.
I haven't heard of them and I definitely
They
need
are
to.
they're a jazz fusion group out of Japan, and they
Okay.
worked in the late 70s up until 2000s. They only had a like their initial like quartet was only like 2 albums or something, and then they got new members and they kept going on. But their self-titled album, it did not make this list, but please go listen to it. I'm gonna sneak in another honorable mention. It's very good.
Okay.
I never would have learned to love so many of these other like jazz fusion groups like Cassiopeia or Bad Bad Not Good, if I first hadn't learned to start loving the genre from Headhunters. And so I feel I could place it no lower than number 3.
That is absolutely incredible. So, like for me on my top 100, Headhunters obviously would make the list. And like partially why I love Q's Juke Joint is because like I said, there's so much jazz that like I wish like there's so many jazz albums that like I want to represent. And I'm like Herbie Hancock, like he needs to be represented.
Mm-hmm.
But because he played on Q's Juke Joint, I feel
Mm,
comfortable. I'm like,
you
okay,
got
that's
your
okay.
you
Herbie
got your
Hancock is
representation.
yeah, he's on the top 10. Like his album isn't, but he
But he
is
is.
because
He
he's
is.
there. He's
He
the
got
reason
the
why we're
rep.
here. Yeah, yeah.
And so is
So,
Shaquille O'Neal,
so
right up there.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Two pioneers. Oh, I was expecting like a music lightning bolt to like strike me saying
Strike me
that.
down. Yeah.
But I love that so much, and
I
I
thought
wish
that
Joey
might,
was here to hear it.
I
Yeah,
know. We'll have to tell him next time we see him.
let him know. Yeah, yeah, because I mean, so last thing I saw ask, do you feel like you can hear like when you listen to Headhunters, can you hear some of the funk um influences in albums like Stadium Arcadium by Red Hot Chili Peppers?
I was about to say, I do not know who is playing the bass on it, but
Headhunters.
yeah. Let me see if I can.
See if I can find it. It'd be
Um,
under.
Paul Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Jackson on bass guitar. I can absolutely hear his influence with, say, Flea as a bassist because
Wow. Okay.
Flea is very jazz inspired from his funk
Mm-hmm.
and jazz inspired in his playing. And so I can totally hear how that set the groundwork for like two punks out of LA to make music based on like the Sex Pistols and then jazz and taking them and combining it into this punky, rocky funk fusion.
And I love how you can hear. I love how you mentioned that, like you can hear it not just like, oh yeah, Herbie Hancock did funk and Red Hot Chili Peppers did funk. So like, yeah, I can hear the influence, but like you can tell that it's in the bass players playing. You can tell that Flea was directly influenced by what Paul Jackson was doing, because
Right.
that's it really shows how much you've like broken down the music and like really listened to it to hear what was happening. And that is beautiful. That is a
Yeah,
beautiful number three.
I have listened to this album so much, and again, it's something that I feel like the more I learn about music, I hear more from it. Like I
Hmm.
feel like I'm understanding how like them like the synergy of them playing together like in like a certain way, like the I don't know, I don't have the words to describe it, but like the vibe between them like comes across in the music. I don't know.
I think as for
It's
jazz
really good.
musicians everywhere, we get it and we get
Okay.
you. I don't know if I could speak for all of them, but I am. So
It's why it exists as a musical uh
yeah,
entity, not a written one.
man, I'm like, I really don't even want to move on. Like, I want to just end it here, but we still got two more albums to
We still
go.
have two more.
So we will mention our number two on Apple Music's list, which I totally agree with. It is Thriller by Michael Jackson. And when you first brought this idea to me and you said, like, what's the best album? Like, according to Apple Music, what do you think is the best album? And it took a second because I was like, well, best, because I was thinking like critically, commercially, and then it was like, oh, there's only one answer. Thriller by Michael Jackson. There's only
Mhm.
one answer. There's only one album that we still play every single dance party. There's only one album that I could sing all the words to. There's
Mhm.
one album that sold 35 million copies in its first year.
Yeah.
There's only one album that's been the best selling albums for 2 years straight. It
Mhm.
outsold everything the first year and the second year. And that's Thriller. And I think it's it's funny because Thriller is like the greatest commercially successful album of all time. If you adjust for inflation or whatever, if it was streaming, it is streaming right now.
Mhm.
But like if it had come out streaming numbers, it would be crushing it. And it is like the most commercially successful album of all time. Easily you can make that argument.
Mhm.
35 million sales is insane in 1 year. And it's still selling copies to this day. And like for music, it's very rare for you to think about that. And it also be one of the greatest albums ever on a critical standpoint as well. Because like when you think about like the top grossing movies of all time, like the most commercially successful movies, what do you think of? The Avengers movies, the Avatar movies,
Titanic.
Titanic, even adjusted with inflation, Gone with the Wind. Now, when you think about the greatest movies of all time, are any of those like in the conversation? Do people talk about them in the same breath?
Not usually.
It's like maybe Titanic, maybe, but most people aren't making that argument. There's completely different lists for the greatest movies of all time. Like
Yeah.
those usually commercial success and critical, like the best movies, like critically
Yeah.
doesn't always cross over. Even
You'll
like
get your Citizen Kanes, your
exactly,
Eraserheads, your
Citizen Kane is exactly the one that I thought of. Even like what's lauded as one of the greatest action movies of all time, Mad Max Fury Road. It didn't gross that much. It was like 380 million, which is not a lot for a movie that cost like well over 100 million to make.
Yeah.
So Thriller's budget was 750,000, which is a lot of money right now. Not that much to, I mean, it's a lot of money right now, and back then it was also a lot of money. Like it was even more money than it was back then. Most albums, like there's a lot of albums it doesn't always cost that much to make an album that big. Depending on who you're working with. Like, Jay-Z's albums probably cost upwards of that amount. But again, for it made back, like for what it made back is absolutely like it made all of it back in just like the first couple of weeks. And again, when you think about Thriller, there are so many, it's still here. It's still played every dance party. Like and like I was trying to, and I almost put Thriller on my list for that reason, because I'm like, I don't really go home and be like, yeah, I'm gonna put on Thriller. But I'm like, when I'm a kid growing up, like, what did I dance to at every single party? I've been listening to Thriller since before I knew what albums were. I've been dancing to Remember the Time, to Thriller, to all the songs on this incredible album since before I
Want to
understood.
be starting something, man?
Oh, yes.
Makes me want to
Yes.
start something.
It makes you want to, yeah. And of course, the reason why and this is why Quincy Jones is my favorite producer as well, because he's from jazz, and he's able to collaborate with Michael Jackson for this. At that time, it was pop. I think now we would consider it more R&B based upon the way like pop music has changed. But it was like a pop disco synth funk. I love that Quincy Jones used like his background in jazz to explore so many genres, because I feel like there's a lot of jazz musicians that won't. And I feel like that's partially why I love Headhunters too, because Herbie Hancock was of that, like, let's bring jazz back to these new elements that we've created. And other people were like, nah, jazz has got to stay over here. And Quincy Jones is like, I'm just going to use my jazz background to make the best album of all time. Just shrug.
No big deal.
Yeah. And PYT still, and like the engineering on this album, like Alabama Shakes is one of the best engineered albums, but like when you talk about the best engineered album of all time, it's Thriller. Like,
yeah, we were talking, you said this is like a gold standard, that like if it doesn't sound as good as this record does, then you need to go back and do some more work.
Yeah, because this record, like, and again, not every musician will have access to the $1,000 studios and stuff like that, and all the amount that it costs to make it. But it came out 40 years ago. If you're not making a song that sounds like, with all the advanced equipment that we have, this was before Pro Tools, this is before recording on a laptop, this was before all of that. You had to record you had to play it live, record it onto a directly onto the record. The word is escaping me right now, but it was analog. Basically, there was no digital recording, and everything you had to do, like in the studio, track it. It was like I said, if you're making something now and it doesn't sound better than this, or at least as good, with all the equipment that we've had, the way microphones have gotten better, it's not good enough. And it's just that simple. And it's like, when you think about like projects from the 80s, again, I compare it to movies because that's like entertainment. You can always tell when something was filmed in the 80s, because it's not going to look as good as what comes out now. This album sounds just as good as something that comes out now. Someone could release this exact same album and everybody would go crazy over it because it sounds just as good now. And there's some songs from the 80s that sound like they're from the 80s based upon the way they were recorded. A lot of songs from the 60s, when they didn't have recording equipment the way we do, sound like they're from the 60s. Thriller sounds like it was recorded yesterday. Which is why I think it's like I said, if you ask me, and the only reason why I didn't have it was because I like Q's Jerk Joint better. Like it would have replaced Q's Jerk Joint on my list, but I
Mhm.
like it better because of all the I feel like I like the production style and everything that he did on it and all the different R&B artists. And
Mhm.
I'm like, I'm still representing, and I wanted to give more love to Quincy Jones for his production style and everything. But this album is still one of the best of all time. PYT is just, it's like, I mean, I said one of the best of all time, the best album of all time. And I mean, I still have one above this, and I think I agree with Apple Music on it.
Yeah.
But it's like critically, commercially, and music industry impact wise, I think it checks off every single box when it comes to those when you're looking at what's the best album of all time.
I think I think for me, while it doesn't have much, like I personally don't enjoy this record to the point to make it a number one like that. I think this is one of those circumstances where it is just so successful in like every metric that it's like like you're just hating if you don't have it up here in like an objective like a big top 10 like what they're trying to do here. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
one of those that it's like it kind of forces its way onto the list whether you really like it or not, just from how like successful it is from all those metrics. So well I might may not enjoy it as a Michael like as my favorite Michael Jackson album. I understand why it is here, and
Mm-hmm.
I not that I think it's bad by any means. I just I totally get why it's here.
Yeah.
I
And
think
I
it's
think
deserving.
and I think the difference is like, we look at some of the great, again, parties, dance songs, like we look at some of the great artists that have released a lot of dance songs, like Whitney Houston, obviously is known for a lot of those really popular dance songs that came out in the 80s and late 90s.
Hmm.
Um, but like at a party, you wouldn't listen to an entire Whitney Houston album. Usually there's a couple of singles here and there.
Yeah.
You could bump Thriller at the entire album. And like when we're talking about staying power, like, the biggest name in dance music right now is probably Dua Lipa. Are
Hmm.
we going to be listening to her music 40 years from now? I don't really think so. I don't think people are going to be getting down to levitating in her songs 40 years from now, when they have parties and stuff. And
Hmm.
we're still listening, and like we could still be listening to Thriller 40 years from now because there is no sign of any of these songs slowing down in how iconic they've become.
Yeah. So Will, what would you have in place of Thriller for your number two spot?
So my number two spot is definitely a me choice, but I feel like it deserves to be on the top 100 list, but I kind of understand that it's not. But mine is Tetsuo and Youth by Lupe Fiasco.
Not surprising.
Yeah, I was like, this kind of like the worst kept secret as far as we
The
have here.
the second I heard Food and Liquor as an honorable mention, I was like, okay, so Tetsuo made the list.
Tetsuo definitely made the list. Yeah, and Food and Liquor, like I said, it's one of those that like could have crept up on the top 10, but because I'm going to be talking about Lupe, I was like, I'll just say it's an honorable mention.
Hmm.
Um, but Tetsuo and Youth
But
is,
Tetsuo and Youth.
if you want, again, if you want, to me, this album exemplifies hip hop. And if you
Mhm.
disagree with me, then find me an album that starts with a 9-minute rap,
Yeah.
and I will wait. I will patiently wait. A 9-minute rap, and half of it was freestyled. And
Mhm.
like to me, you can't get any more hip hop than that. Like Lupe Fiasco has always been one of my favorite artists. Um, and I've most part loved everything that he's done. So I'm probably very biased in my opinion. But
Yes.
like when I talked about how I love how Coloring Book explores so many different genres of hip hop, I feel like Tetsuo and Youth does that even more.
Mhm.
Like Coloring Book explored a lot, and I feel like Tetsuo and Youth took it even further, even though Tetsuo and Youth came out before Coloring Book. Um, and like to me, I have one skip on here. I don't really like the song No Scratches. It's okay to me. Um,
Oh yeah.
but the rest of them, yeah, I don't really know why. I can't really explain it. But even that song incorporates a lot of rock elements that like
Mhm.
Coloring Book didn't explore. And
Yeah.
I think there was something there. It just didn't really hit for me. But the
Mhm.
rest of the album, you've got Mural, which is a hard-hitting, just straight up rap track.
What a
And
way to start your album. Like
right.
it's so
And the interludes paint like a perfect picture and way to get into it, right? And
mhm.
also, I love that like Lupe Fiasco painted this album cover.
Yeah.
Like, so talk about an artist. How many artists do you know painted their album cover? And the first song is called Mural. Like, he is redefining what it means to be an artist. And I feel like it incorporates throughout the whole song. So you start with Blur My Hands, which is a hip hop song that heavily blends R&B with Guy Sebastian's amazing vocals, the guy he did Battle Scars with, which is a song I
Mhm.
really, really love. But I love how he allowed Guy Sebastian to get to some like great R&B vocals because Battle Scars is more of like a pop song, and this feels like sultry R&B, and Lupe is just crooning over the beat and basically telling all of his haters, "Screw you," like
Yeah.
over this R&B lace track. Then you've got Dots and Lines, which incorporates folk into a hip hop song as a way to say screw you to my label that messed up my career because
Mhm.
Lupe went through the whole lasers thing, and I feel like if Lupe didn't have the whole lasers, I also don't know if we would have got this album if Lupe didn't go through the whole thing with lasers and his career and the Great American Rap album.
Mhm.
But I feel like if we didn't and we had this album, like if this one came out after the Cool, we'd be talking about Lupe way differently because Food and Liquor was well received as a classic. The Cool was received as a classic, and kind of like what happened to Chance with The Big Day, while
Yeah.
Lasers got very popular,
Mhm.
Lupe lost a lot of the critical momentum that he was building up because people saw Lasers as a sellout.
Yeah.
So he kind of just had to go back to his like while a lot of people gravitated to the album, they weren't the same people that he really
Right.
needed, right?
And
And
it
like
definitely did not hit in the same like appealing way
mhm.
that like Lupe fans would really be enjoying. Like Lasers
Right.
is very, very different.
Yeah. And it feels I still like it, but it's very surface compared to what we're used to from Lupe.
Mhm.
And then one of my favorite of the tracks is Fall because it's such like a melancholy. Like in each of those tracks, summer, spring, fall, and winter,
Yeah, the
they
Four Seasons.
capture yeah the four seasons. They capture the essence of the season that they're depicting through the
Mhm.
instrument as well, not just through the sound effects. Like
Yeah.
Fall, like you can kind of hear crunching leaves, but that's not what does it. What does it is the bass line, is that
Mhm.
walking acoustic bass to capture Fall, right?
Mhm.
And then we have Prisoner 1 and 2, which is almost like a cinematic track with the way that it's built with all these strings and everything in there, incorporating that into hip hop. And then you have Body of Work, which is another like almost R&B rap hybrid over. And
Mhm.
this song is 10 years old, and I still listen to it and discover stuff. And I'm still trying to figure out what exactly are you saying on this song? Like,
Mhm.
what exactly are you saying? And then he has Terrace Martin come in with an incredible saxophone solo.
Yeah.
And Terrace Martin is one of my favorite saxophonists, one of my favorite, artists right now. And he
Mhm.
almost would have made the list. Like he would have made the list as an artist, but his albums don't really hit for me the way some of his other projects do.
Hmm.
But
Okay.
anyway, keep going through again, exploring every single layer of hip hop. Little Death is cool, is jazz rap at its finest. And like
Mhm.
drill music in Zion is definitely on my list. But like the reason why it's not an honorable mention and the reason why, because I love jazz rap and having Lupe on jazz rap just sounds like a match made in heaven. But the reason why it didn't quite make it is because I think Lupe is at his best when he's versatile and exploring every genre of hip hop,
Hmm.
going through all these different genres and really showing off what he can do. No Scratches is kind of again that rock hip hop hybrid, kind of reminiscent of like a Fort Minor,
Hmm.
and he's had some crazy verses. You want to hear some crazy early Lupe? Look up Spray Paint Ink Pens and Be Somebody by Fort Minor.
Is
To
that
get
the
way
one
back.
that he did with what are the guys from Linkin Park?
Yep, Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park.
Mike Shinoda. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's right.
And that was with Skylar. He did a lot of those songs with Skylar Grey before she became big, and she was known as Holly Brook.
Mm.
Then you have just classic trap with Chopper. And
Hmm.
like the funny part for Chopper was like Lupe originally intended for everyone to do like a two bar verse,
Hmm.
not a 2 bar verse, a 16 bar verse,
Hmm.
but he sent them a 32 bar track.
Hmm.
So that way they had something to go off of.
Right.
Everybody sent back a
A
32 bar
32 bar.
verse. That's why it's so long. It's
That's why it's the
9 minutes
longest.
because everybody sent back a 32 except for Rick Ross because Lupe sent it to him and he's like, man, I'm only doing 16 bars. And Lupe's like, I've got these 7 other rappers that did 32. I can't just put a Rick Ross 16 and I
Hmm.
can't just cut their verse. I can't tell them like, hey, give me a 16 instead.
Right.
He went with it. And I think the best verse on that song is still Lupe. And he
Yeah.
murders it. Murders it. Deliver with Ty Dolla Sign.
Hmm.
Um, beautifully emotionally heart-wrenching song. Talking about just like the simple idea, like the pizza man won't deliver pizza in the hood because he's too scared of getting shot. And I feel
Hmm.
like Ty Dolla Sign really lets his heart out. And there's been a lot of like really great collaborations with Lupe Fiasco and Ty Dolla Sign. It's not a match I saw coming, but I'm
Hmm.
glad it happened.
Yeah.
Like, did not expect it, but I'm glad it happened. Um, Madonna is another, it's not like a skip for me, but it's not one of my favorite ones. And that one kind of ventures into more pop
Hmm.
rap hybrid. And then
Yeah.
you have Adoration of the Magi, which is my favorite song on the entire album because it's like a
Hmm.
jazz trap like mix with Crystal Torres on the
Hmm.
flugelhorn. I think she's playing on that one. And then you
Hmm.
have They Resurrect Over New to end it with Absol and Troy, which literally sounds like a video game soundtrack, which is part of the
Hmm.
theme of it. Like you sound like you're in a video game. And he
Hmm.
has like all these different elements in this, and it creates this wonderfully still cohesive hip hop album. And I think, because I think that's really what hip hop is too. Like it's its own genre, but it can borrow so much from other genres. It can take so
Hmm.
much. Like on a rock album, it doesn't really make sense sometimes, like to have like on a heavy rock album. It's like if one of the tracks just like went into jazz, it would kind of be like, what? Like it would kind of take you out of it. But that's why
Hmm.
I love hip hop because you can explore so many different genres while remaining in hip hop. And I
Right.
think this album embodies that. And the only thing I say that it's missing and why it's not my number one album or why like I can see why it's not on the list is because you still like your album still has to have commercial appeal. I feel like
Hmm.
that's an important part of being successful. And
Yeah.
I would venture to say that this album has no commercial appeal. Like even the singles that it was released, like they're
Uh-huh.
so complex, like there's no way you could hear it on the radio. Um, and it's
Yeah.
like so like maybe if Lupe had gotten one song on there that felt a little bit more like accessible, but I think that's the whole point of this album. This album is kind of a giant middle finger to his label and a hey, I'm gonna do this, and if people like it, great, but I'm not trying to do I'm trying to make a work of art here. Let me
Yeah.
make my work of art. And that's what he made. It is a work of art from the album cover to the songs. And the best part is like you can listen to it and get one story, and you can listen to it backwards and get a completely different story and hear everything in a completely different way. And
Hmm.
it's insane and I love it. And I think it's peak Lupe. And like I said, I think if this album came out instead of Lasers, we'd be talking about him completely differently. And I think this album would have made it on the top 100.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have much to add in that sense.
I
Aside
said a
from,
lot.
yeah, well, I mean, like I know how much this album means to you. You're the reason I enjoy Lupe Fiasco. Like I would not have really listened to him if it weren't, and I'm grateful for it. This definitely reminds me of how people talk about, say, like MF Doom as like your favorite rapper's favorite rapper kind of thing. This feels like one of those, like, this is a hip hop fan's hip hop album.
Hmm.
Like this is not made for general appeal. This doesn't feel like it doesn't even feel that accessible. Like the things that are really interesting and unique and cool and hard hitting are kind of like, you have to understand a little bit of hip hop first. You have to like lay the groundwork.
Hmm.
Like I could, if I was just getting into it, I could not listen to Tetsuo and Youth and feel like I got anything from it. Like I feel like I need to get a baseline. I need to do the rounds of like, okay, I understand the genre a bit, and then you listen to this album and it's like, whoa, okay, now I get why it's so good, because the technique and the skill that everyone's throwing out here is incredible.
Yeah, and I think, one thing this album is kind of missing, but it doesn't need it, but it is missing, is the coolness and the cool confidence that Lupe used to have, the cool energy that Lupe used to have. Because like if you listen to The Cool and Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor, he sounds
Mhm.
like a different rapper than he does on this album. Because on that album, he sounds like cool, confident, and he has this energy that he brings when he's rapping. And he still has deeper cuts, deeper
Mhm.
songs, but he still has like an energy. It's, you can tell that rap is like exciting for him. It's very, very exciting. And then
Yeah.
everything happened with Lasers and he lost it. And it feels like Atlantic Records like took that away from him.
Mhm.
And with this album, like that's something I don't think he'll ever be able to get back truly. But with this album, he crafted one that doesn't need it. It doesn't need like it. You can kind of hear a little bit of it from on Blur My Hands, but he sounds more like a veteran, like a rap veteran who he kind of got aged into a veteran really quickly with all of that label dispute and all those things that went into it. And so,
Mhm.
he's one of those people that's like his career might have been very different had we not seen him. Um, but either way, and he still will rap hits from Lasers. People still, I went to like 3 or 4 of his concerts in the past year, and he still loves performing The Show Goes On. Even though he hates
Mhm.
that album, it's still his biggest hit, and he still performs it, and people vibe with it. And but I think he would also agree this is his best album. This is his favorite album. I don't think there's any question among Lupe fans. Some older Lupe fans will probably say The Cool or maybe Food and Liquor.
Mhm.
But if you ask Lupe, this is his favorite album. And I think I agree this is his best album.
It I'm of the impression that I think any album is great if the musicians making it are like invested, if they are like inspired by it. It will make me like music I don't typically like if you're passionate enough. And Lupe is certainly passionate on Tetsuo and Youth.
Hmm. And it's like you look at all the reviews. One of the first one is like his 2006 may still be the one to pick since it's leaner and more instant, but
Mhm.
Tetsuo and Youth strolls its way into greatness after a couple of listens and wipes out all the bitter aftertaste of Lasers as if that misstep never happened.
Mm.
And like, I don't know, to me, there's very few artists that got rolled on so terribly for Lasers. Like, here we are 2 albums later, and people are still saying that Lasers was such crap, and we're
Was
so glad that
awful.
Lupe didn't do it. And I'm like, I mean, even Jay-Z has released crappy albums that people just don't talk
Mhm.
about anymore. So, yeah, that's
People
number
just
two.
really hated
That's one new.
Laser.
They just really hated Lasers, and like I said, it wasn't the best album. Um, but I definitely think that this is the project that he wanted to do. And again, if we had been able to see more of an organic growth from him turning to like that cool, confident, suave into like more of a veteran hip hop statesman, it would have made a lot more sense. But thanks to Atlantic Records, we didn't really get that.
So my number two goes back to Jim Croce. I got a name, Jim Croce. I that once again, like I said, that one's more sentimental too. Uh, One, Jim Croce, he's a very like when it comes to like folky country storytelling, I, I would definitely say more folky. He made a huge impression on that industry. Um, but I feel like that one, just the song I Got a Name in general, it when I listen to that song, it makes me feel like proud to be me. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's like, I got a name, and I carry it with me like my daddy did. You know what I mean? And so that one, like I said, that's more personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you have as number two, Ty?
My number two pick is an album that, like, relatively speaking, in my life has come across like more recently within the last couple of years.
Okay.
And when I heard it first, I really appreciated some of like the hits, but I didn't really listen to it until a flight. I was flying home, and it was one of the few albums I had downloaded on my phone. I was like, let me give it a re-listen. And I listened to it, and there was nothing else to do aside from just listen to this album. And I did, and I was like, oh my God, I need to keep listening to this. And I had to listen to it again and then again. And I haven't stopped since. And she has since
Wow.
become one of my favorite vocalists, period.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be Erica Badu's Mama's Gun.
What? All
I
right.
I can't I cannot explain how much I love listening to and unpacking like the lyrics of this album.
Mm-hmm.
This feels this feels like she is speaking, even though it's only her second album ever, and I think in her first Baduism, which did make Apple's 100 list. um I think she is very, she's very detailed, she's very not cryptic, I'm trying to think of the right word, like she's very poetic with her
Mm-hmm.
with her lyrics. There's a lot to unpack, but I think it's so surprising to me to hear an artist who only on like her sophomore album be so wise with what she's saying. Like every time I listen to a song and I listen to it again and I peel it back a little bit more, I feel like I'm tapping into this like wisdom that I I didn't have beforehand. And it feels like I'm learning more about myself. Like this is one of the few albums, well, not few, but this is one of the albums that I will go back to and I will think about, and I'm like, I will reflect on my own life from listening to how she talks about her experiences with life. And I think of, in what areas of my life can I be grateful for things that I've had? What areas can I say, I really have had it really well in these parts. And to do it while at the same time having such beautiful, like the way that she sings is so beautiful. It's like candy to my ears. There's
Andy.
a bunch of moments where she has these little like vocal stems, like on the track and on, where I don't want to imitate it because I'm just gonna do like the worst thing ever. But she does these little things with her voice that's just so like I've never heard anyone do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've not listened to too much neo soul as a subgenre to really get into, but Mama's Gun is like I don't know. It feels like it's the one for me.
All right. And that was so I guess that puts a lot more in perspective why you chose Erica Badu to be the lead singer of your
Y-
supergroup.
Yeah, I think she's genuinely my favorite vocalist. Um,
Really, singer. So not
I
just female vocalist, not just favorite
I
singer.
I think she's my favorite vocal. Like listening to her voice is beautiful. Like I feel like strip the instruments away and I think you could just listen to her voice and it's beautiful. It may come across as like slam poetry, but it's like that's the best hour 10 minutes of slam poetry you're ever gonna listen to is
Yeah.
is my takeaway. I think it brings this like I mean, me with art, with any kind of art, I want to feel like I can learn something from it or experience something new. And this is an
Interesting.
album that I feel like I can learn from. Not just experiencing a new genre, but it feels like the way that she is talking about her life and her experiences, she's doing it in a way that makes me like take out a notebook and like write things down. Like I that's the best way I can describe it is just I want to study her story
It's
from her
kind of like
music.
it's kind of like sitting down with mama and having her talk to you, hence the name Mama's Gun. Like you sound like you're talking like Erica Badu is your mother almost. And like you guys just had this conversation and she's just sharing you all the stuff and you're like, all this wisdom I've learned. And it's like, well, clearly that was the goal of the album.
Mama Badu.
Mama Badu. Uh,
um no,
mhm.
I think too that she's had an influence on like on people who have been like in the hip hop world who have since come up with that because she was around um Lauren Hill at the time that she was blowing up and she was around I mean Questlove helped produce one of the tracks on this album. I believe
Mhm.
it's the first one, Penitentiary Philosophy. I think he's one of the writers, I think, on that track. Um and she grew up in this she was making music at this time where jazz rap was really in its prime and in its peak and I think she had an influence on the jazz rap of the time.
Oh
She
yeah,
made
undoubtedly.
Yeah, and I think vice versa because there's tracks on here that feel like they could belong um like side by side on like a collab album.
Yeah. And like Questlove, he helped produce it and he played drums on a lot of it. First
Mhm.
track, fourth, fifth. I'm looking at the personnel, seventh through ninth and the 14th. So he played drums on a good majority of like almost
Oh,
any
okay.
live drums, she pretty much used him. If it was drum programming, she maybe used someone else. I think JD was the producer, but if she was using live drums, it was Questlove. And again, the like Eric Badu is the queen of neo soul for a reason. And
Mhm.
like I said, looking at the personnel, the arranger for and like jazz rap. And like again, I love the way that some jazz musicians kind of embrace the blending and mixing of genres. The guy who arranged all the horn elements on the song is Roy
Mhm.
Hargrove. And Roy Hargrove is a jazz trumpet player who wrote one of my favorite jazz songs of all time in Strasbourg St. Denis. And I literally perform that song every time I get together with my band. Every concert we have, like we open it or end it with that song.
Mhm.
And again, to know that he arranged the horns on Mama's Gun is like, well, that's why they sound so good. Because he
Oh, okay.
wrote such an incredible jazz song that's kind of it's almost a standard. I think it's a standard, it's one of the more fun jazz songs to play, I would say.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, like I said, you can hear it like that's my besides Boplicity, that's probably my second favorite jazz song.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so yeah, I mean even Stephen Marley got on this album, which is pretty awesome. It's She's the queen of neo soul for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's again one of those things that like the more you like, the higher you get up on this list, it's just like, I don't know, I just love it. It's
It
really
speaks for
good.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, just listen to it and you'll know.
Mhm.